The sun hung low over the relentless expanse of cracked earth and thorned sagebrush, casting long shadows that whispered of secrets buried beneath the arid soil. Amid the skeletal silhouettes of gnarled mesquites, a lone figure moved with quiet purpose, an Apache hunter, his face etched by past sorrows and survival, traced by scars deeper than flesh, eyes sharp yet weary. He stumbled upon a scene that shattered the brittle calm. A silent girl, her wide eyes trembling with a terror that spoke without words, held captive by a gambler whose charm masked a venomous intent. The air thickened with unspoken threats as the hunter's gaze locked onto the cruel smile that shadowed her fragile form. Around them, the unforgiving landscape stretched endlessly under a sky bruised with dusk. Dust swirled in the dry wind, carrying the acrid scent of burnt wood and stale whiskey. The ground beneath was cracked, testament to drought and hardship, reflecting the harshness of a land where mercy was scarce. The gambler's makeshift camp lay nestled beside an abandoned railway siding, a pitiful oasis of desperation and deception amid the barren wild. His coarse laugh bled through the stillness, weaving a tension as taut as a drawn bowstring into the very fabric of the settling night. The hunter's every muscle tensed, worn leather creaking softly as he crouched behind a split-rail fence. His dark hair, tangled with dust, skin bronzed and marked from years beneath the ruthless sun, eyes carrying the weight of a tribe scattered, a family lost. He noticed the girl's fragile frame trembling beneath the threadbare shawl, silence her only shield against the cruel world for which she was too young to bear. Her gaze flickered toward the gambler, a man whose swagger betrayed a hunger far darker than mere fortune. The hunter's heart clenched at the sight. The girl trapped not only by chains of circumstance, but by a predator's calculated game, one poised to strip away more than her freedom. Within moments, the hunter recognized the danger looming like a storm on the horizon. The gambler's intentions were clear. This was no game of chance, but a cruel auctioning of innocence. The hunter's resolve steeled, a quiet flame of justice ignited beneath years of solitude. He could not stand aside. Movement rippled through his body as he began weaving a plan, a silent promise anchoring his every step. The girl would be free. The gambler's hold on her was fragile, and the hunter's time had come to shatter it. His first attempt was cautious, a shadow slipping closer, eyes watching for a crack in the gambler's sinister smile. The girl's breath hitched as she sensed the approach, her silence trembling like fragile glass. The gambler snarled low warnings, muscles coiled like a rattlesnake sensing prey. But the hunter's steady gaze met the threat without falter. Tension thickened as the gambler's lackeys emerged from the dark edges of camp, suspicion sparking in their narrowed eyes. The girl's small hand found the hunter's, a silent pact forged in the cold grip of desperation. Suddenly, a shout tore through the twilight. The gambler's head snapped toward the escaped pair, fury flaming in his eyes as he bellowed for his men. Boots pounded against rocky ground, the sharp clatter of gunshells loading. The precarious silence shattered. Incense of danger, rising like smoke from dry brush. The hunter tightened his grip on the girl's hand. Behind them, the gambler's voice cracked the night. The chase was on. This was no longer a quiet rescue, but a fight for survival unraveling in the unforgiving. Frontier. Do not miss what comes next in this gripping saga. Subscribe now and follow the Apache hunter's bold stand against darkness in the treacherous lands of the Old West. Your journey into courage and resilience continues with every chapter. Stay with us. The desert stretched endless beneath the sinking sun. Jagged shadows clutching the cracked earth as the Apache hunter forced his weary legs onward. Every step was a battle, a duel against the blistering heat and the fatigue gnawing at his bones. In his grip, the silent girl's hand trembled slightly, yet she clung tighter to him, fragile as a fledgling sparrow, but stubbornly refusing to release her newfound guardian. Her breath came shallow, uneven, small mists fading into the dry afternoon air. His patience was unyielding, a silent promise to her, to himself, that he would not let these cruel lands swallow her whole. Behind them, the dry wind carried the harsh thunder of boots pounding against stone and sand. The gambler's mercenaries drew closer, their shadows stretching longer with each heartbeat. The hunter knew they were twisted souls, hardened by greed and violence, and couldn't afford to stumble. Not now. They crossed a stretch of sun-baked soil, pocked by brittle sagebrush. The only sound, the scrape of worn leather on rock, and the faint flutter of the girl's ragged shawl against his side. She stole a glance up at him, eyes shimmering with fear, but flickering toward something. Unspoken, a question without words, a tentative spark of trust slowly kindling. He offered a faint nod, his voice a rough whisper, swallowed by the vast silence. Soon, stay close. Heat wavered in the distance, waves of heat rippling like ghosts as the hunter's mind flickered to the dangers ahead. The terrain wouldn't forgive weakness. They needed to find refuge where the earth cracked open, canyons, dry creek beds, anything to hide them from the hunter's relentless gaze. As the sun dipped further, the land's colors shifted, burnt orange melting into bruised purple, but the desperate chase pressed on like a beast unyielding. The girl's steps faltered, tiny knees buckling beneath years of silent torment and newfound terror. He stopped, lowering himself with a steady hand, letting her lean against rough skin and calloused palm. The dryness of his touch was a stark contrast to the softness of her trembling form. No words passed between them. She needed no speech to feel the promise tethered in his gaze. Safety, for now. Her lips parted slightly. A faint wheeze escaped, a breath held for years in the deep shadows of fear. He searched her eyes, catching a whisper of something else. Gratitude, maybe, or the shards of a hope long lost. The hunter's own chest ached, the weight of silence deeper than any wound. Behind them, faint cracking sounds in the distance whispered approaching danger. The mercenaries moved with practiced precision, their voices barely carrying on the air, but sharp with cruel intent. The gambler's grip was tightening through proxies, hunger burning hotter with every passing hour. Branches snapped. The hunter motioned the girl to rise, steadying her as they skirted the jagged edge of a dry wash, its sandy bed etched deep by rain long ago. Darkness slowly pooled in the crevices, promising concealment beneath its inky veil. Hours melted as they pressed on through the unforgiving land. Sweat, bead after bead, carving silent maps down dusty skin. The hunter's mind drifted briefly to memories layered beneath those scars, the faces lost, the times he had faltered. But now, a new focus burned fierce and pure. The girl's trust was fragile, but growing. A delicate plant, fighting for life in barren soil. She breathed easier when he slowed, leaning against a sun-bleached boulder, eyes closing briefly against the relentless assault of the day. As the first stars blinked to life in the violet sky, the hunter traced the landscape for signs. Footprints disturbed, broken twigs, the faint glint of moonlight on metal. There, a cluster of freshly turned dirt, footprints trailing sharply toward them, faint but unmistakable. The mercenaries had almost caught their scent, closing the distance with every minute. He tightened his grip on her hand, and for the first time, she nestled against his side, a silent plea for protection, a fragile hope in the consuming night. "We're close," he whispered, voice heavy, with the command wrapped in warning. "They're close." The girl's eyes, dark and fearful, locked onto his with steady resolve, a silent vow passing between them. Though words failed her, her quiet courage spoke volumes louder than sound. Night's chill began to settle, creeping up their backs like icy fingers. But it could not quell the heated pulse of determination that beat within the Apache hunter's chest. Somewhere, unseen and silent, the gambler's mercenaries lurked, shadows merging with the darkness, hearts set on reclaiming what they'd lost. But the hunter knew what they did not. This night, the desert belonged to those who moved with the wind's quiet will, to those who fought not just for survival, but for something worth more than gold or power. The journey was far from over, and as the stars wheeled overhead, he sensed their pursuers nearer than ever, footsteps closing in like a storm on the horizon. A harsh breath cut through the cold night air. They were close, closer than the darkness dared to hide. The desert was a tapestry of dusk, the fading light casting long stretched shadows across the jagged ridges and sun-baked soil. The Apache hunter moved deliberately, the girl's small hand entwined in his rough grip. Their breaths came ragged, mingling with the silence that spoke louder than words. The chase had grown desperate, and yet fate had twisted their path toward an unexpected ally. Near a crumbling, weathered homestead, half hidden beneath tangled vines and dusty timbers, a figure emerged, an old man whose face was carved from years of hard living and harder choices. Once a feared pistolero, his reputation etched in whispered stories and faded wanted posters. Now a silent ghost wandering the edges of civilization. The hunter's eyes narrowed, recognizing the man instantly. "Jeb," he said quietly, voice rough with restrained relief, The old pistolero nodded, his gaze sharp but weary. "Didn't think I'd see you again out here." His eyes shifted down to the girl, a flicker of concern softening his hardened expression. "She's with me," the hunter said. "The gambler's bloodhounds are close. I need your help." Jeb's weathered hands brushed the brim of his hat, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. "You're lucky I'm not in whatever hellhole they've buried me in. Time's not on your side, friend." Together they moved quickly, an uneasy alliance rekindled by necessity rather than trust. Jeb knew the terrain like the lines etched on his palm, and with his guidance, the hunter led the girl through whispering canyons and shadowed gorges, places where pursuers would falter and disappear like mirages. The girl, silent still, but perceptive, clung closer to the hunter's side, her dark eyes searching the older man with cautious curiosity. The tension in her shoulders eased just a fraction, the flicker of fear tempered by a fragile hope. Hours passed under the watchful gaze of the night sky as stars blinked awake, indifferent to mortal struggles below. The trio made camp beneath the twisted arms of a dying juniper, dousing their lantern to avoid leading any unwelcome eyes. As the hunter sat cross-legged beside the flickering embers, a quiet moment stretched between them. The girl's gaze drifted upward, then, suddenly, her frail hand shot out, touching the hunter's forearm with a delicate urgency. Her fingers traced a pattern etched deep into his skin, an intricate tattoo of intertwined feathers and ancient symbols, the mark of his APACHE heritage. The hunter startled, eyes meeting hers in the dim firelight. That silent touch carried unspoken words, a secret, a connection, a bridge to a past neither was ready to voice aloud. His mind raced, recognizing something buried in her gesture. It was more than fear or gratitude. It was a key to a puzzle he hadn't realized was unfolding. "Why did you?" he began, but she pulled back, the fragile barrier of silence intact. Jeb observed in grim silence. "That girl's hiding more than you reckon. Secrets that could shake the dust off old graves," he murmured after a long beat. The night pressed heavy with unspoken truths. The hunter's thoughts churned. This gesture was a thread tugging at a tangled web woven far beyond the gambler's greedy grasp. If the mercenaries were relentless, others would prove even darker in intent. Unseen around them, the desert held its breath. The faintest rustle suggested a watcher lurking in the shadows, a wolf circling the weak. Suddenly, a hurried clip-clop of hooves echoed distantly, a signal unmistakable to all three. The gambler's mercenaries were drawing closer, but now a new presence stirred. A watcher from the rival shadows, eyes gleaming with deadly interest in the unfolding game. Jeb's gaze hardened, his hand twitching toward a worn revolver that had long ago ended too many tales. This ain't just about a missing girl anymore. There's a bigger fish in the waters, and it's waking up. The hunter nodded, muscles coiling like steel springs, the weight of responsibility sharpening his senses. The girl pressed close, her small frame trembling but steadied by flickering courage in her eyes. Moonlight bathed the rocky outcrop where they crouched, shadows folding around them like an armor of silence. The desert seemed vast still, but the dangers had multiplied, beyond the relentless gambler's pursuit. A gust stirred, carrying a scent that set the hunter's jaw tight. A promise of dark forces moving unseen. A third enemy, far more ruthless than anything he'd faced yet. The girl's gaze locked with his in a moment suspended between fear and trust. Her silent secret now a spark in a powder keg. Far off, the sound of approaching boots wove a sinister chorus, mercenaries closing in, but now with unseen hunters trailing their trail. The hunter's voice came low and steady, barely more than a breath. They're coming. Not just them. Something else waits in the shadows. Her eyes widened just enough, a silent summons to brace for the storm that was closing in on all sides. The desert night swallowed their whispered resolve, and somewhere in the vast darkness, a deadly triad of threats converged. All paths now led deeper into the unknown. They were no longer running from a single enemy. They were running toward war. The cold clang of gun steel echoed sharp through the rocky pass, a harsh symphony splitting the fragile quiet like shards of broken glass. The Apache hunter's breath came heavy, each inhale stinging his wounded ribs. His bloodied hand tightened instinctively around the silent girl's slender wrist, anchoring her trembling body against the scrape of gravel beneath their feet. Above them, the evening sky bled from bruised purple to obsidian, stars emerging like distant, watchful eyes. The ambush had shattered their desperate flight. A snarling pack of men brandished rifles and knives, their faces masked in fury and greed. The gambler's rivals, bitter men with vengeance burning in their eyes, closed in fast. The hunter's mind raced, the pain in his side a sharp reminder of how precarious their hold on life had become. He shoved the girl behind a jagged outcrop of sandstone, her fragile frame blending into the shadows as best she could. The air was thick with dust and raw tension. He counted the intruders, too many and too prepared for bloodlust to be denied. The first volley shattered silence, bullets pinging off stone with cruel precision. Instinct seized him. The hunter dropped low, firing back from a crouch. Each shot was a prayer, each movement a scarce currency of survival. He felt the girl shiver against him, silent yet terrifyingly exposed. His scarred fingers brushed strands of dark hair from her pale brow, grounding him amidst the chaos. Suddenly, a spear-thin bullet grazed his arm, biting deep. Pain lanced fierce, but clarity emerged sharper still. Protect her. Above all else, protect her. With a grunt of effort, he dragged her into the narrow crevice carved by centuries of wind and time, nature's reluctant sanctuary. The rivals howled their frustration, voices cracking like thunder as they searched. Inside the cramped refuge, the hunter pressed against the rough stone, blood warm against his shirt. His breath rattled, body trembling, but spirit unbroken. The girl's eyes met his, wide and haunting in the dimming light. For a long moment, silence tethered them, a wordless vow etched in the shadows. He traced his calloused hand down his forearm, fingertips brushing an old tattoo faded by sun and time. A web of black ink, feathers entwined with ancient symbols, the legacy of an Apache warrior, burdened by ghosts of the past. His gaze dropped then, drawn to a glint caught on the girl's worn cloak, a small, tarnished insignia pinned close to her heart. A crest, etched with the same motif as the shadowed symbols he had seen whispered about in the gambler circles. Power, influence, a dangerous ancestry buried beneath the dust. Questions gnawed at him like ravenous crows. Who was she, beyond mute fear? What secret did this mark conceal that tethered her to the gambler's dark empire? Pain pulsed sharp in his side, but the weight of responsibility was heavier. This was no mere chase for freedom. It had become a struggle against shadows far larger than fistfights and gunsmoke. He settled back on the jagged stone, every sense alert. The girl huddled close, her small frame trembling less now, soothed by the rough warmth of his presence. The hunter's thoughts turned inward, a spiral of past failures and silent vows. He had wandered the borderlands a ghost, haunted by loss and silent regret. Yet here, in the tenuous bond with this mute child, flickered a fragile chance for redemption. Outside, the night breathed cold and relentless. The distant clatter of boots echoed ominously, enemies prowling the edges of this rocky tomb, unwilling to relinquish their prize. A sudden roar rent the air, the gamblers' men venting their fury, their curse-laden shouts carrying across the ravine. The hunter's wounded fingers clenched the insignia against his chest, fire kindling in his eyes. Whatever the cost, he would bear it. He would shield this girl from the darkness seeking to swallow her whole. And then the hunter's sharp gaze caught movement, a shadow shifting beyond the flickering firelight, silent and watching. Not just the gambler's men hunted them now. There was a deeper threat lurking, unseen but palpably close, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The desert's cold grip tightened around them as the hunter whispered, voice low and fierce, "This insignia, it's more than a mark. It's a storm coming." The girl lifted her head slightly, eyes shining with unspoken warning. Together they braced against the gathering shadows, knowing the fight was far from over. Outside, the night swallowed their whispered resolve, and somewhere in the blackness beyond the rocks, a darker hunt began. The village stirred like a restless beast, its dusty streets alive with murmurs and wary glances. The Apache hunter led the silent girl through the throng, a stark contrast to the frenetic pulse of townsfolk, whose eyes darted between shadows and whispered rumors. Their arrival did not go unnoticed. News traveled fast in this frenetic outpost, where every soul measured debts written in blood and advantage. The hunter's gaze scanned the crowd, ragged ranch hands nursing old grudges, wary shopkeepers eyeing strangers with suspicion, and small cliques huddled behind swollen whiskey mugs. To some, they were just ghosts passing through, the fugitive and her unlikely guardian. But to others, they represented a ripple in the delicate balance of power. The gambler's long reach had sunk deep roots. Here and the wheels of his empire ground with ruthless precision. They moved with purpose toward the village's dim heart, where the scent of stale smoke mingled with horse sweat and unspoken tensions. At a weather-beaten corner saloon, a sharp-eyed woman watched from the shadows, her stare cutting through the smoky haze like a knife. Known only as the mujer de mirada acerada, her fierce gaze had forged alliances and broken enemies alike. In her, the hunter sensed a figure woven tightly into the fabric of this place's whispered power plays. He approached her cautiously. "We seek aid against the gambler." Her lips curled into a thin, knowing smile, the sort that held promises both bitter and dangerous. "He's bleeding, the village dry, offering gold for scalp and silence alike," she said, voice low but steady. "And now, the girl you protect, she is more valuable than any corpse he plans to pile. I've seen the webs he weaves. You're playing with fire." The hunter nodded, ever watchful, as the girl clung silently to the side of his battered coat. The mujer's eyes shifted toward the child, discerning something beyond her silence, a spark of significance that no one here dared ignore. "You'll find no easy refuge here," the mujer warned, stepping closer. "Rival factions lick their wounds and sharpen knives in the dark. But some of us still have debts to settle, and the gambler's blood money has made many enemies." Her words hung heavy between them, a bitter truth cloaked in the dust and desperation. To this village, the gambler was both curse and kingpin, a spider whose web ensnared all who dared cross it. The hunter weighed her offer carefully. His scars ached beneath the pressing sun, every step a reminder of wounds old and new. Sharing the girl's secret burden had brought him into the labyrinth of local power, and though distrust fluttered like a rat in dark corners, he saw that in this fractured town, alliances were the fragile currency of survival. The mujer scanned the street, her sharp eyes catching movement where shadows curled unevenly. Word is the gambler's reward for the girl has climbed. He grows desperate. Mercenaries harsher and deadlier than his usual hounds are on their way. A ripple of unease passed through the gathered faces at her words. Rumors of cold-blooded killers sent chills deeper than the desert night. The hunter tightened his grip on the girl's hand, sensing the weight of the storm gathering on the horizon. The signs were unmistakable, not just a rising bounty, but the arrival of ruthless hunters who answered only to greed and bloodlust. They came not for justice, but annihilation. In the quiet that followed, the mujer's voice dropped to a whisper, sharp as a blade. "If they catch her, it won't be just chains and silence. It will be a slaughter. You need more. Then courage. You'll need cunning, the kind that cuts through bone and shadow." The hunter nodded once, resolute but burdened. He met the girl's wide, dark eyes, windows to a silence shaped by terror and secrets yet untold. She clung tightly, her small frame frail but unwavering, an ember in the growing night. As the sun sunk behind the ragged horizon, the village seemed to hold its breath. The flickering lanterns cast long, trembling silhouettes along the cracked walls, a fragile shield against the unbeatable darkness sprinting toward them. The mujer stepped back, melding silently into the crowd, like a shadow slipping away. Her warning echoed in the hunter's mind, a grim chant carried on the dust-heavy wind. Above, the first stars pierced the twilight veil, cold and distant witnesses to the gathering peril below. The gambler's hunters would come, and soon. More mercenaries, crueler than before, were closing in faster than any could guess. And the hunter's fragile ward, silent though she was, carried a fate that would ignite a wildfire, sweeping through this fractured land. The hunt was far from over. The darkness was gathering, and in the restless heartbeat of the village, the mujer's last words drifted on the wind. Beware, the price climbs, death rides with it. The night air hung thick with tension as the Apache hunter and the silent girl crouched behind the low adobe wall of the rundown town's outskirts. The distant clatter of horses' hooves echoed like a drumbeat of impending violence, growing louder with every second. The mujer de mirada acerada had insisted on a bold plan, an ambush to stop the mercenaries who pursued them, yet all knew the risk that came with drawing blood in these desperate lands. The hunter's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the shadows between the ramshackle buildings. The girl sat still at his side, her breath shallow but steady, a fragile rhythm they both clung to amid the creeping dread. With patient hands, he adjusted the worn shawl around her shoulders, as if wrapping a piece of his own resolve around her silent frame. Her eyes, wide and dark, flickered with a new edge tonight, a flicker of understanding, slowly burning behind the silence. The mujer had told them, in hushed but fierce words, that the mercenaries were more numerous and crueler than before. The gamblers' greed had called forth killers who answered to no law but blood money. Yet it was not just their weapons that threatened this fragile alliance. It was the darkness festering in the corners of trust, the whispers of betrayal no one could fully see coming. The hunter's heart tightened in the cool grip of night. He played over the details of his plan. The narrow alley where they waited would funnel their enemies close, too close for the mercenaries to maneuver freely. He had taken care to set his traps, a loose brick by a doorframe, the rusted iron shutter rigged to crash noisily if disturbed. Each subtle noise would be a signal, a warning, a call to arms. But his mind kept returning to the girl, the reason for the risk, the pulse of hope in his battered chest. Why was she silent? Why did her eyes hold secrets too heavy for words? The mujer's words echoed bitterly in his thoughts. There was something she knew, something that could unravel the gambler's entire empire, a truth tightly bound to her silence. He glanced down. The girl looked back, her gaze steady, unwavering. No words bridged the gap, but the hunter sensed the unspoken pact between them deepening. They were no longer just hunter and ward. They were entwined in a struggle far greater than either had chosen alone. Suddenly, the distant hoofbeats fractured into rapid gallops. Shadows emerged, 5 mercenaries, ragged and ruthless, their faces etched with the greed and cruelty that haunted every corner of the West. Their leader, a scarred man with eyes like cold steel, spurred them onward, calling out in a low voice that carried menace and command. The hunter's breath stilled. He gripped the girl's hand tightly, signaling her to stay low. The narrow street welcomed the mercenaries like a dark river, flowing toward the trap set with grim determination. As the first figure stepped onto the trap's trigger, the iron shutter crashed down, sending a sharp clatter. echoing like a gunshot through the empty street. Two men whirled around, guns drawn, but the sudden noise blinded their senses. In that fraction of suspended chaos, the hunter launched from his hiding place. His rifle barked, a crack that shattered the night's fragile stillness. The mercenaries faltered, scrambling as shadows and gunfire intertwined. The girl, pressed against the hunter's side, did not flinch, but crouched lower, a silent island amid the storm. But amid the chaos came an unexpected sound, a sharp whisper, barely audible above the shouts and bullets. The thief of trust. Before the hunter could react, a figure stepped forward behind them, quiet, nimble, and familiar. It was the mujer, but not as an ally. Her eyes gleamed, with a cold calculation, her hand slipping a knife from beneath her cloak. The hunter's breath caught, betrayal slicing through the haze like a blade. The woman they had trusted, who had offered refuge and aid, now revealed a darker allegiance. The mercenaries behind her paused, doubt flickering in their eyes. But the hombre with cold steel eyes smiled cruelly, welcoming this new turn. The girl's head jerked up, a silent alarm vibrating through her small frame. A hunter twisted, rifle slamming against the woman's wrist moments before the blade could cut deep. A struggle erupted, violent, desperate, a clash of wills and survival beneath the watchful stars. In the fray, the girl was yanked backward, strong arms pulling her away. From the hunter's desperate grasp, her wide eyes locked on his for the briefest of moments, filled with fear and a plea to fight, to not let go. The hunter's fingers scraped empty air as she was torn from his side, swallowed by the chaos and shadows. Rage thundered in his chest. The world momentarily tilted, as if the very earth cupped him with betrayal and loss. The ambush dissolved into a cacophony of shouts and gunfire fading into the night, leaving the hunter slumped against the crumbling wall, breath ragged, senses dulled by shock. He pressed a hand to his chest, then to his mouth, silent prayers lost in the cold desert wind. Her absence was a jagged wound, sharper than any bullet's bite. The moon cast a pale, unforgiving light on the empty street where they had planned salvation but found treachery instead. The hunter's voice broke the silence, rough and resolute, though it carried the weight of shattered trust. They've taken her. The girl, she's gone. Somewhere in the dark, beyond earshot and sight, a trail of fading footsteps whispered of a desperate flight. And with the night swallowing all, one truth loomed brutal and clear. The hunter was now alone. Darkness clung heavy over the village streets as the silent girl slipped through alleys like a wraith, her small frame huddled beneath a threadbare shawl. The frantic pulse of her heart thudded in her ears, an unspoken rhythm sinking with every cautious step between shadowed doorways and flickering lantern pools. Alone, yet sharper now, a fledgling learning to evade the hawks circling overhead. The cacophony of the ambush, the clash of gunfire, the betrayal, had fractured the fragile bond she barely understood. But survival was carved into her bones, born from loss and silence. Each breath was careful, each movement calculated. She knew the hunter was vulnerable, wounded, forced into the shadows to heal. And so, alone, she melted into the village's restless heartbeat. Behind her, the hunter pressed feverishly against rough timber in a dim room dimmed by smoke and dust. Bruised ribs flared agony with every shallow breath, but his mind danced with desperate resolve and haunted memories. His hands trembled from pain and rage as he clutched a rag soaked in cold water to the bleeding wound hidden beneath his leather shirt. The echo of her absence hammered at his chest, harsher than any bullet's puncture. Her silent plea at the last moment, the weight in her gaze, seared into his soul like a brand. She had not just been torn from his grasp. A part of his fractured spirit had been ripped away. Memories crawled in the dim light, a tangled web of moments stitched between them. The quiet strength in her eyes, the fragile trust earned through silent gestures, the touch that bridged worlds of pain and hope. Beneath that fragile floor lay the origin of her silence, the storm buried deeper than gunshots or threats. A fleeting flashback unfurled in the haze behind his burning lids. A charred homestead swallowed by flame, voices cut short by smoke and suffocating fear. A promise unanswered lingering in the clinging silence of a child who had lost everything before the world knew her name. The hunter's jaw tightened. This silence was no mere absence of speech. It was a fortress built by terror and secrets, walls he was sworn to breach no matter the cost. His fingers brushed the faded tattoo on his forearm, the symbol tethering him to a legacy of survival and the fierce protectiveness inherited from his ancestors. Outside, the sharp clatter of the gamblers' return shattered the night like thunder breaking a fragile truce. His footsteps stomped through the streets with furious purpose, an unrelenting hunter driven by obsession and rage that no amount of gold could quell. The man's voice, jagged and cruel, seethed through the alleys, a predatory growl promising no mercy, no quarter. The hunter swallowed a grim curse, pain coiling through his ribs like barbed wire. He forced his body upright, pressing a hand to the narrow window cracked with age and dust. The flickering lantern light spilled into the street below, illuminating figures moving with death's precise tempo. The gambler was back, and he was nothing like the calculated menace before. Now he was wrath incarnate, a storm ravaging everything. In his path to reclaim what he claimed as his own, the girl's quiet bravery echoed in his chest, a fragile flame in the tempest. Despite betrayal and wounds, the hunter felt the thread joining their fates tighten taut. He would find her. He would shield her. No darkness could drown the stubborn light she carried. The village held its breath beneath the moon's cold gaze. Shadows lengthened and twisted, the promise of danger curdling in the air like a stain. Somewhere out there, the gambler's fury met the hunted's desperation. The hunter's fists clenched, the ache in his side drowned by the surge of hatred and protection. His voice broke the silence, a low, steady murmur meant for no one but himself and the desert winds that had witnessed so much loss. He's coming, the gambler himself, furious, relentless, and this time there's no turning back. Far below, the distant howl of hooves carried a chilling warning, slicing through the still night. The gambler's shadow loomed large once more, unstoppable and implacable. The hunter's gaze hardened, eyes burning with the fire of vows forged in blood and silence. The stakes rose higher than ever, and the fragile hope of a silent girl depended on the warrior who refused to let her go. Tonight, the hunter would no longer run, for the gambler had returned, furious and implacable. The night air was taut with purpose as the Apache hunter and the silent girl gathered beneath the faint outline of the woman known only as the mujer de mirada acerada, her sharp gaze cutting through the murmuring shadows like a sharpened blade. The small group puddled in the pale glow of a dying campfire outside the ghost town that lay like a forgotten husk on the edge of the wilderness, shared a heavy silence. The hunter's eyes never left the jagged horizon, where the old city's dilapidated buildings rose, weather-beaten and broken, but full of the echoes of dark deals, whispered treacheries, and the gambler's ruthless games. Here, far from the scattered tribes and the sparse settlements they had passed, the gambler ruled a sinister domain, a place where fortunes were stolen in. Smoke-filled rooms and loyalties sold like cattle. This place, it holds nothing but ghosts and greed, the hunter muttered under his breath, voice rough from dry desert winds. The girl shifted close, the worn threads of her shawl brushing against his weathered leather coat. Her silence was as present as the desert itself, a heavy cloak both shielding and separating. Yet tonight, that silence seemed to carry a fierce determination, underscored by the flicker of trust she had begun to build. The mujer stepped forward, her eyes narrow but sharp with conviction. This ghost town is more than a ruin. It's his lair. Every crooked card played, every broken promise echoes through these empty streets. Her voice was low but full of warning. You'll need every ounce of cunning to survive his claws here. The hunter's jaw tightened, scanning the shadowed streets. We are not here to hide. We confront him. All of this risk because this girl's silence holds secrets that can topple his empire. The mohair gave a slow nod, cold understanding lighting her eyes. And he's not the only one waiting. This town breeds dangerous men, loyal to no one but their own vices. They'll fight dirty. They'll kill without remorse. The stillness hung thick as the hunter laid out their plan in terse words, each breath a calculated gamble. The mohair's small group would fan out, closing off likely escape routes, while he and the girl slipped quietly through the shattered streets to the heart of the gambler's domain. The once grand saloon, now a den of shadows and ruthless whispers. Wind stirred, rattling broken window frames, carrying the faint metallic tang of danger. The girl gripped his hand with quiet strength, a tether in the chaos to come. The hunter's eyes caught the moonlight, glinting off the small insignia pinned to her shawl, the faded crest that had marked her from the moment fate had thrown them together. As they moved, the woman's warning echoed in the deepest folds of his mind. The gambler's net was tightening. The bounty on the girl's head had grown monstrous, and with it, the cruelty of hired mercenaries dragging. Their boots closer with each fading hour. Every footfall in the crumbling streets felt like a heartbeat racing toward confrontation. Unease coiled around the hunter's muscles as he scanned windows and doorways, shadows seeming to breathe, with hidden eyes watching, waiting. Suddenly, the distant rumble of horses' hooves sliced through the stillness. The mujeres group tensed, disappearing into the cloak of night to meet the ominous arrival. The gamblers' men were coming, in full force, their hunger for the girl fueling a storm of violence. The hunter pulled the girl behind a battered beam, pressing his body low, breath mingling with hers in a quiet rhythm. His hand traced the faded feather tattoo on his forearm, a silent vow in the darkness. He would protect her no matter the cost. Steps echoed nearer, voices dripping with menace. The gambler's presence was a dark pulse, stirring the ghost town into restless shadows. But the hunter's gaze hardened. He was no stranger to death's edge, and tonight he carried not just his own ghosts, but the fragile hope of a girl whose voice had been stolen by cruelty. With the mujeres' allies moving to cut off escape, the trap was set. The gambler's lair loomed ahead, windows like hollow eyes staring into the night. The hunter's lips tightened as he prepared for the final confrontation, the weight of every step heavy with the unspoken promise of retribution. The silent girl squeezed his hand. Ah, small surge of courage passing between them in the silent language they shared. The hunter met her gaze, fierce and steady, beneath the wan moonlight. Whatever awaited inside, they faced it together. And as the first shadow detached itself from the gambler's stronghold, a figure moving with lethal grace, the hunter whispered through clenched teeth, "It begins." The cold wind swept through the empty streets, carrying with it the whispered tremors of a duel about to ignite in the heart of the ghost town. The cold desert night swallowed the battered streets of the ghost town as the Apache hunter tightened his grip on the silent girl's hand. The distant hoofbeats were thunder now, furious and unyielding. The gambler's shadow loomed close, a storm of greed and rage stalking their every step. Yet within the hunter's gaze burned a fierce resolve, tempered by the fire of the bond they had forged, a connection that transcended silence and scars. They moved with cautious purpose through the shattered remains of broken doorways and splintered windows, the weight of every footfall heavy with anticipation. The mujer de mirada acerada's warning echoed in the hunter's mind. This was no refuge, but a crucible where fates would be forged or broken. In the heart of the town, the dilapidated saloon stood like a grim fortress of forgotten promises and whispered deceit. Shadows folded into its gaping doorway, hiding the dark man who had hunted them for so long. The gambler, whose smile twisted with venom beneath cold, calculating eyes. The hunter's breath caught as he stepped forward, feeling the burden of the girl pressed close to him. Her silence was a cloak that hid secrets, a truth powerful enough to unravel the gambler's empire. And now, it was time for those secrets to be unveiled. The gambler emerged, flanked by cruel mercenaries whose eyes glinted with bloodlust. "You think you can challenge me here?" he sneered, voice like a whip cracked across the dry air. That mute girl belongs to me. She's mine to bend or break, to silence or sell. The girl's dark eyes flashed, not with fear, but with the fierce glint of defiance. For the first time, her lips trembled, parting to release a soft, aching sound, her voice breaking free from chains forged in shadows. The gambler's sneer faltered, disbelief flickering across his face. The hunter stepped forward, voice low and unwavering. She's no prize to be claimed. She's free, and tonight your empire dies with your lies. The saloon's doors creaked open wider as the mujer and her allies appeared, shadows transformed into steel. The gambler's men tensed, but the tide had shifted. In a heartbeat, gunfire shattered the silence, echoes ricocheting off crumbling walls and broken dreams. The hunter moved with the precision of a man who had survived countless battles, each shot a deliberate stroke, painting the gambler's downfall. The girl, despite her lingering fear, stood beside him, a silent force now awakened. Her small hands clutched the insignia pinned to her shawl, a symbol no longer just of past wounds, but of reclaimed power. Amid the chaos, truth spilled like fire. The insignia revealed her lineage, a forgotten heir to a legacy the gambler had tried to bury beneath blood and gold. Her silence had been his weapon, a shield to hide her from enemies who hunted not just a girl, but a key to unraveling his dark network. As the gambler faltered, desperation twisting his face, the hunter closed the distance. The duel was silent but fierce, the clash of wills sharper than any bullet. The gambler's reign crumbled under the weight of justice carried by the hunter's steady hand and the girl's newfound voice. With a final, broken cry, the gambler fell, his empire shattered like glass beneath the desert sun. Silence reclaimed the night, but it was different now, charged with the quiet hum of a new beginning. The mujer approached, her eyes softer, yet still sharp. This place, it's freed from his shadow, for now. The hunter turned to the girl, whose voice, though still fragile, sang softly into the night, words of freedom, of hope, of the courage born from silence. She took her first steps into that uncertain future, not as a captive, but as a beacon of resilience. Together, they walked from the ghost town's ruins, the first light of dawn painting the horizon in hues of promise. The scars they carried, etched in flesh and memory, were testament not to defeat, but to their survival, to the bonds forged in hardship and trust. The land stretched vast before them, the wind carrying whispers of rebirth and redemption. The hunter's gaze was steady, the girl's voice growing stronger with every breath. Their journey was far from over, but this night had sealed a truth eternal. Even in the harshest deserts, life could bloom. And in the silence once forced upon her, the girl found her voice, loud, clear, and free. Together, they stepped forward, shadows fading beneath the relentless light of a new dawn.